I guess all I'll say is to everyone who would not know, this is Jeffery Huong, who will be leading this meeting and panel. He's an alum from, Jeffrey, did you actually graduate in 2017?
Yeah, and then going in
2017. And then our other panelists you have here are Michelle Tran, 19, Deborah Coro, 19, and then Ismi, who will be joining us shortly, is from the first spawner class, graduated in 2017 in May. So all you, Jeffrey.
Cool. Thanks, Trinity. So I'm guessing a large portion of everyone out here today is excited to go out and join the workforce once you've graduated. Is that correct? It can't gauge off facial expressions since most of your microphones are off, or your cameras off, your microphones are on mute. But I do see a cool thumbs up. So basically how this works, we want this to be as interactive as possible. So feel free to jump in on the comments just halfway through if you have a comment or have a question. So to get started, basically panelists, well, I'm Jeffrey, I'm the moderator. So again, like Trinity said, I graduated in 2017. Currently working full-time, doing a grind, 70 time and money. And of course, we know with adulting, the money part starts coming into play a lot more. I'm sure as poor college students, we all had experience with that as well. But in the adult life, it's I'd say hey, it goes one level up. So with that, let's go ahead and get started and let's talk about this high altitude. So professional wise, for professionals that are working 9 to 5 kind of jobs, so our panelists, what has been the biggest change between that and your college life? If you want to start with Brinda.
So I'm going to be eating during this call because I've had a long day and I'm treating myself to Thai food. But yeah, I think, first of all, I wanted to thank Jeffrey for organizing this and Trinity and everyone joining this call and helping put this together. I think it's great that, we're still able to connect during COVID with all the challenges that we've been facing. So I would say the biggest change for me was my sense of community, right? So I think being at UH, whether in person or with spawners or going to football games, like that whole host of activity that you see really liven up a campus and your friends, I would say I lost that. I lost that when I moved to Dallas. I made a move for work, like other people on this call. And I moved to a city that, even though it was within Texas, I didn't really know many people. I had one friend from UH who worked at the Federal Reserve, and he's great, but I can't hang out with him 100% of the time. So I'd say the sense of community, it definitely took me a while to build that up. And initially, and Caitlin and Deb and others know this, initially, like I would drive to Houston every other month, right? Like I would visit, Houston was home, I'd see my friends. But I'd say that was the most difficult piece. And I think after time, right, I made friends, but even as someone who's extroverted and enjoyed volunteering in the Dallas community, it was not instant. It took probably 6 months to a year for me to form any meaningful connections in Dallas post-grad.
Okay, so speaking about that social kind of network, Michelle, when you moved out to DC, you had mentioned that the whole social network kind of stuff, you had to also go out and rebuild, go out and find your place. Can you speak a little bit on that?
I guess it's a little different and the same in that DC is a very transient city. And so you have a lot of young people like our age moving into the city. And so it's a little weird because like I would make friends and then they would like move away, right? And it's like, well, great. I put all this effort into making my one friend. Unlike Brinda, I'm pretty introverted. And so then like, I put all my energy into this one friend and then you got away. And so that was hard. In a way that was easy is that I participated in the summer program before and I made friends who were like on a very similar career trajectory as I was. And so when I was moving out to DC, I had friends who were also moving there. And so like, in that sense, like I did have like a few people I could always like lean on. And so that was really nice. I guess like bouncing back to your other question about like what was really weird about starting work in a 9 to 5 way is that I think as a college student, and I I'm assuming a lot of you are pretty guilty of this, is that I would spend my day like pretty lax and then do all my hard work at night, essentially. And so that's not really what you get to do in a 9 to 5 job. So you're like there from 9 to 5 and you're expected to put in hours. And I still do a lot of work outside of regular business hours, depending on like what needs to get done. But it was really hard for me, I think. I would say the first month, but it was probably more than the first month of just like getting acquainted to like being on for those like certain hours of the day. So yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Michelle. So how about you, Isme, moving out to Chicago when you first started going to IBM, going completely different path from your or seemed like complete different path from chemical engineering. How was that?
Well, for me, for better, for worse, it wasn't too big of a change because I'm not from the Houston area. Like I had to move to the Houston area, 6 hours away, to like pursue my major. So like moving to another major city for moving for work wasn't like a big thing. The big different ones, well, I used to drive 6 hours, now I fly for 6 hours, so it wasn't too big of a change. I think for me, I had a very rigorous major, and so the nice positive change was that I had a lot more free time than I did in college. So it was nice, like being able to get new hobbies and just being able to have a more consistent work-life balance. And so work-life balance is nice because then it forced me to separate things. So yeah.
Okay. So Deb, when you started working at New Hope, you had already had experience with the community partner as a Bonner. So do you feel like when you did your transition from full-time college student to full-time worker with a group that you already knew, did you feel like that transition was smooth? How did that work? What were some of the biggest changes when you started working at New Hope?
So when I graduated, I didn't actually start at New Hope. I was a recruiter for a couple of months, but not a couple months, like 9 months, but I got laid off during COVID back in April, and then I started working at New Hope. To answer the first question, I would say going in with a partner that I already knew, even though it was a position that I hadn't worked before and I wasn't familiar with like fair housing and like all of the regulations, and there's like so much attention to detail and so many different little things you have to know because it is low income housing, like it's government sponsored, there's so many reports, but I just had a really kind of in-depth understanding of like the mission and the vision behind it because of working closely with New Hope through Campus Kitchen, and also just like knowing what RG and Trinity were doing with the program when they were there. I mean, RG's still there. So yeah, it was a really helpful way to transition. I will say it is a little tough at the properties because there's like one staff member who does everything. So there's no office assistant to train the previous office assistant. So I kind of had to like learn from the manual and like ask my boss things here and there, but she has her own stuff to worry about. So it's a lot of learning on the go, but there was a lot that I did understand from just like going on deliveries and like helping Sarah out with initiatives and programs. And then I also have like a huge appreciation for the people who come in and do that, because like I remember being on the other side of the desk as a student. And I would say, to answer the other question about my biggest challenge leaving college and entering like the adult workforce, would be realizing that I couldn't just spend any of my time however I wanted, because in college you can set your school schedule, you can kind of set your work schedule, your life schedule, you can go to the rec at 3 a.m., you can go to Moody at 4, but now that I have a 9 to 5 or an 8 to 4, I have to be in bed at a certain time. I have to have done meal prep at a certain time every week, or like I won't have food, or like I will wake up and like just have a terrible day. Like you have to be structured. And because you spend so much time kind of like Michelle said, like at work, you're doing work tasks, you're not doing personal tasks, you're not doing school tasks, other stuff. So the hours that you have outside of work, you have to dedicate to getting all of your personal tasks done, getting all of your errands done, and also making sure that you're taking care of yourself, self-care, like resting, and also all of your social engagements. And because you're not in that same like central location where the people you work with are also your friends and also your classmates, like it's so separated. So you really have to make sure that you're scheduling and that you are being mindful of your time if you want to like achieve all of those things. And obviously for some people, some of those things are more important than others, but just for general self-actualization, I'm a psychology major, all of those things have like a bit of importance. So
All great points, Deb. So as Deb was mentioning about starting work, so like once you start, you kind of have to go figure out what your role is in your place, and you got to figure out how to develop beyond that. So transition into a little bit about professional development. So sure, now you've got the 9 to 5 grind down, but that puts you at a very stagnant position, I guess. And as bonders, we know everyone likes to overachieve. So, and also looking like over into the next steps beyond what you're just doing every single day. So in terms of professional development, I'll jump back to Ismi. On LinkedIn, you've been pretty active posting about different certifications that you've been earning. So how does that play into your normal work? How do you find time to do both your, I guess, normal 9 to 5 plus getting all those extra credentials so you can do your work more effectively?
Well, I will say like my employer, IBM, really encourages like learning. There's this idea of like we're constantly learning. We have this like internal badge thingy mabob, so like they gamify it. It's very much not a like, oh, you come in and you're never gonna learn anything. That would be so boring. I would probably quit. But so it helps that I'm in an environment that encourages that. And I mean, I think you just what's important for you in your career. Like it took me a minute to realize what was important, but if you want to do it, you just make the time. Whether that's like, everybody knows themselves. And so for me, it's sometimes I was like waking up an hour earlier and studying, or an hour after, whatever, or like whenever it fits your schedule. So I just think if you want it, you can put the time in. And if anybody needs help, like sort of figuring out what those things are, like I'm sure we can help, or connect with us and we can point you in the right direction. You don't have to do it all by yourself.
Yeah, so speaking on that note, so Ismay works in the private sector, very private as in, so for example, IBM, Parsons, Capgemini, we're all basically consultants, and all our work is money driven. So Brenda, how about for you as working on the private side? How's your employer in terms of getting certifications, going back to school, variety of things of that nature?
Yeah, so I want to make a quick distinction in that, at least in my place, it's a balance of being driven by profit, right, versus providing access to technology for changing industries. So that's really, that's kind of at the heart of what firms like mine and IBM does as well, right, is connecting people to technology better and faster. But ironically enough, even with the services that we provide, I wouldn't say that we have a regimented learning program, right? So like the way that you can minor in something at UH, or double major, or I don't know, like audit a course. Like I know that Grace Schwartz did, who's not on this call, but as an alumna. I would say it's not very structured, and it does differentiate between where you work. I would say generally within the private and the nonprofit and public sector. So like there are a lot of courses that are made available to me that are mine for the taking, right, in terms of learning. And it's generally like encouraged, but it is not required for me to like have certain courses completed. We have like, I think, an hour requirement yearly for us to do trainings. But really it's driven by where I think I want or need to grow. and I think it's also like project driven. So I don't know if it's like this for you, Jeffrey or Ismay, but if I'm working on one project and there's like clearly a need identified that I currently don't have, then training for that is encouraged. But again, not required. So I think it kind of varies on where you're at, but to Ismay's point, you have to have that like self-starter mentality to go after it, and have your employer support you in that, which IBM clearly does.
Jeffrey, you're muted.
Cool, thanks. So I was saying in terms of like choosing your company, so like obviously as you graduate from college, the application process is quite a pain for sometimes. For some of us, it takes quite a while for you to get a job. So in terms of choosing a company, going public, private, or nonprofit, just depends. What were some of your decision-making factors for any of the panelists?
For me, it was trial and error. I will say that a little bit. So when I was in college, I interned for a refugee servicing nonprofit, and I did some grant writing and fundraising work and really liked it. But I didn't feel like my scope of work was enough, right? Like I didn't want to be a full-time grant writer. And at that time, I didn't think I was ready to move to DC, but time has changed that. And then the internship I had after that was as a trade analyst for BP's oil and gas commodities. So two very different experiences. Kind of realized I didn't want to go full time into either. Thought about the project-based work in Bonner, and I learned more about consulting, and it seemed like the right next step. So it was through a lot of conversations with mentors, family, friends, and looking at companies. And I just want to stress this to like everyone on the call, whether you're applying for grad school or a job, like the whole interview them just as much as you be interviewed by them is key, right? Like I think we try so hard in college to like, we're doing good things, but we're trying to please people and like make sure that we're prepared for them. But really like wherever you're going to go next is investing in you, and it needs to match not only your ethics, if that matters to you for the place you work for, but do they support what your growth looks like, right? Like if it's finances you're focused on, okay, great. Like what are their 401k matching programs? So I'd say like when you're looking at your search, cater what you're looking for and filter that by the companies that you're applying for. Like don't just look at the role, look at like what the company stands for, how much they're paying you, like how much they're going to let you advance in your career. That's something that I didn't even think about. I was like, oh, like this sounds like a good starting pay. But then my friend was like, okay, what about promotions? What about bonuses? And I was like, I didn't know. I didn't even think about that. So definitely happy to talk to people offline about that process, but talk to your mentors, talk to your fellow Bonners, like talk to your family if you're have this big question mark. Because I don't know, I think if you don't feel sure about your decision or you feel kind of lost. I was a senior in the fall of my senior year who didn't, like I turned down a full-time offer because I was like, I didn't think it was the right thing. And if any of you are like in business, like that's just not something you do, right? Like you're not supposed to turn down a full-time offer. But I took time, talked to friends and family, applied and got a job in April, and I graduated in May. But it was because I talked to people and took time to interview companies, not just apply to 100 places. Sorry, long answer, but yeah.
Oh, that was great. How about you, Michelle?
I just want to second everything Brinda said first. And I guess like to caveat, I did think a lot about like career progression, in part because like it's not my idea. My intention is to go to grad school, and it was always to go to grad school even as I was graduating, right? But I knew that I wanted something in between. Like I didn't want to do more schooling right away. And so I was definitely looking for a job that would help me on that pathway. And then my pathway, my goal is to get a PhD in economics. And so that's very niche. That's a very like specific goal. And so there's only so many institutions that can offer what I need as my in-between, right? The Federal Reserve is probably the government entity you would want to work for if you were to pursue a PhD in economics, but there's also like any number of like think tanks in and around DC. I was also looking at like Austin. There are some also in Houston that do really interesting work. So those are the kind of things I was looking at. I also looked at the private sector, but it's really new. And there's one of the big things that I wanted was autonomy. I wanted kind of what we had in Bonner is like space, give me a task and a space to do that and to solve it on my own. And that's what I get a lot of. It's not true. So I guess this is a good piece of advice that I should say too, is that if you're working for a huge institution, like I am, like I'm working for an institution that employs thousands of people, but throughout the system, right? But it really matters what the team you're working for is. It does matter like what your company stands for, what your firm stands for, whatever. But ultimately, at the end of the day, what you're really doing is you're working with a team to solve problems for the most part. And that can look in any number of ways, but it really matters who that team is. Is your boss, is your manager going to support you and give you autonomy? And if those things are important to you, like it was important to me, those are, like Brinda said, you have to interview the people who are trying to hire you as much as they're trying to interview you.
Well, thanks, Michelle. So next question is going to direct it to Deb. So with COVID, obviously, the economy became unstable for a little while. It's starting to come up again, but various industries are still being impacted, including mine, which is pretty unfortunate, just depending on where you're at and what your company's goals are and whether or not your company is being run by shareholders or if it's being run by your internal board of directors. But occasionally you end up on the side where your job is at risk. So how does that play into your decision making, your next steps, figuring out where to go, figuring out what you've gained from your job to go on to your next one? That's for Deb. Awesome.
Sorry, trouble unmuting there. I would say number one, it kind of quickly taught me that you will always be kind of disposable at any job that you go to until, I mean, at a certain point, like you get to a niche level of skill or knowledge, you get to be indisposable. But up until that point, like a job is a job. It's an agreement that either of you guys, you or your employer, can break at any time, especially in like an at-will state like Texas. So you need to have value in yourself and like purpose and drive beyond what your job is in that moment and just like what your career is in general. So that was one thing. But also, I am kind of in the same boat as Michelle, where I always plan to go back to school. My issue is I am very wayward and always have been, in that I never have quite had the plan and kind of just like am letting it find me. But I always try and do like projects and jobs that I find fulfilling, and like what I really care about at my core is like helping people and just like trying to figure out the best way to monetize that and like be like financially successful to a certain point is like what I've been working on. But my first job was recruiting, so helping people who are jobless getting jobs, and also helping companies who need workers to find qualified candidates who can work for them. And that was really cool because I've always been super into professional development, super into coaching and mentoring. So I got to really build a lot of those skills, build interviewing skills. HR is something that's always kind of been on my radar. So I got to get a lot of experience in that regard. Now I am an office assistant at New Hope, and basically I run the front desk and also all of the paperwork situation, which is a lot of paperwork when it comes to New Hope, because it's all of the applications, it's the financial certifications for everybody who lives in the units, because you need to report to like the housing department, you need to report to all the programs. Like there's a lot to keep track of. So I'm learning a lot of management skills. And also another great thing I like about New Hope is they really like to promote from within, and they like people to want to progress in the company and go up. So I definitely could have the opportunity to move to another property and be a manager within like a year or so. And I always have the opportunity to like learn more about what we're doing, or like ask my boss if I can help her with this or that. So that's just really cool that I like there isn't a necessarily like training trajectory path, but I am allowed to kind of build my own path. And that was the same as my previous company as well. Honestly, they were really eager to like let people fit in where they wanted to fit in. After you prove that you can do the work, they would create roles all the time where people would thrive to keep you in the company because, like I said, they became invaluable. So that's my answer.
Oh, thanks, Deb. So back to you, Ismay. So we're going to start to transition over into the money side. So Ismay had brought up a good point earlier when we were talking about graduating without student loans or with student loans and how you're managing that and how to go become debt free and also start saving up for retirement. So Ismay, you work at a pretty large company, so I'm sure there's some retirement benefits and also I guess different kinds of plans. So could you speak a little bit more on that and how to start planning for, I mean, again, we're all in our 20s right now, so retirement seems like some place that's really far away. It's important for you to figure out where it is or what it is and how to plan effectively. So go ahead, Ismay.
Yeah, so I'll just very honest. Like I graduated with student loans, like a decent, not like outrageous, but also a decent amount. And at least for my situation, just speaking to my experience, I don't like it wouldn't if I had to pay my student loans, like I didn't have the option of my parents coming in and taking over my student loan payment. That's just not within my frame of life. And so once I knew those were sort of like my context and my boundaries, I made a plan for myself and say, okay, like what does this student loan amount mean? Like this like amount that I need to pay every month, like what does this mean? And that's when I learned like, oh, if I pay this amount every month, I need to pay this amount for the next 10 years to like pay off my student loans, which I think that's something a lot of people my age didn't know a couple years ago. And so that's outrageous. Like I was 20 something year old kid. Like how could I pay for something for 10 years? That's half of my life. So then I created a plan for myself where I pretty much said each month I'm going to give this much. And, I had a plan to pay it all off that was much shorter than 10 years. And so whether that amount for you is more or less, like I just really encourage y'all to have like a plan. And I mean, some months like I just had a lot more spending than other months. Like, so I would just adjust accordingly, but definitely have a plan. I mean, no amount is too small, I don't think. So just have a plan. And to go back to your point about retirement and 401ks, like Michelle, I work in a big company where we're like a bunch of like 1 out of 1,000 people, but just be aware. Actually, let me take a step back. I when I like got my job, I wasn't thinking about a lot of the sort of like, do I fit in, do this and that, a lot of these very like existential questions. I like needed a job and I needed to go gain skills because that's what the marketplace told me. So that's the very practical point of view of looking at things. But once I was working at my job, I learned a little bit more about 401k. At my company, pretty much every dollar you put in at any point you can take with you, versus at some companies, every year you for example, like your first year you're only allowed to keep like 20% of whatever it is that you put in. But I'll be honest, like even if those were the terms, I would have still gone and worked at IBM. I mean, I was just not in a position to say, yeah, I don't like your terms, I won't go work for you. But do be aware of what those terms are once you're employed. Yeah, I think that's a nice balanced answer.
Well, thanks, Izzy. So beyond just 401k and putting money into there, we all know that money doesn't quite grow when it's sitting in the bank. So Michelle, I saw a little grin over there. Can you tell us a little bit about that and I guess what are some things we can do if we have spare money available?
I feel like despite popular opinion, I don't spend a lot of time in investment. I just put them in like indexes and they're pretty reliable. I know I also have money in like credit unions because they tend to have better rates. And also money market funds tend to be pretty good as well. Sorry, I know like this is my job.